Today on The Rundown, we're diving into two critical and timely discussions. First, the ongoing debate around video games and violence. Do games really influence behavior, or is the connection more myth than fact? And second, we'll broaden our perspective and examine the intricate relationship between social media and mental health. How is our constant connectivity shaping the way we think, feel, and live? With insights from our expert panel, we'll unpack the facts, challenge some assumptions, and explore the impact of these issues on our lives. Let's jump in. Welcome to The Rundown.
Who are these experts?
Hey, everyone. Welcome to The Rundown. You know what I just realized? I just realized that I forgot to populate this in Mukana. So I apologize if you're over in Mukana looking for this. I forgot to plug the thing. I think most people watch on YouTube, but I did forget to do that. I know that Ray is watching us online, and I'm really happy to see you here, Ray. It's good to have you. And I'm also really, really excited to have my friends back with me. I've got some amazing friends here today. Hello, Tamra.
Hello, David. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm happier now that I'm here with you. And Lois, my expert. Good to see you.
I never tell them what I'm expert in, It's petting kittens.
You know what? That's good. Because kittens don't like me. So if you can get them to sit long enough for you to pet them, then I think you've won.
I'm on the fly.
There you go. Dave, how are you, sir?
I'm good today.
I have a feeling you're going to be the expert tonight.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with video
We should
games.
get my credentials, and then it'll explain why I'm an expert.
So I'm going to ask you for your credentials because I have zero. I have never, I think other than Pac-Man, I don't think I've ever played a video game. It's just not something that has ever been of interest to me. And yet I see the amazing impact that gaming has had on youth today. And I'll just start with just one quick insight that I do have about gamification in general, that gamification has really seeped into education in profoundly wonderful ways. It has allowed us to create educational and learning opportunities for children in a language that they already speak, the language of video games. But what that says is that they have been taught this language of video games over many, many decades, and it is now impacting the way that they live in society. So the question for today, and then Dave, I'm gonna give it to you to start us out, if that's okay, is has this impact been for the good or for the detriment of youth's participation in society? Dave, let me pass it to you. Tell us some of your credentials around this, and then teach us a little bit.
Sure. I'm not a real heavy gamer, but I was a gamer for a while. And my son grew up playing games. He's a computer age fellow, 34 now, but that's how long he's been mousing around the world. I commit this from the media lit thing because I used to go and do presentations to teacher groups. What do they call them? Conventions. Teachers' conventions would have me in to do a lecture on this impact of media on teaching. And I'd also go to parent nights and talk to the moms and dads about gaming and about television and about comic books and all the rest of it. And they were quite frightened of gaming because, as with most new things, we don't dive in deeply. We just let it roll over us and we don't explore it too much. But I used to start by saying, if your son was playing on his BMX bike for 8 hours a day, you'd be concerned, wouldn't you? If he was reading a book for 8 hours a day, then would you be concerned? And then suddenly being in his room playing video games is a concern. The only concern I had with my son was dealing with video games where it's multiplayer and you play with people from all over the world. And I've done that myself. I was a Quake player for a little while. Quake was an action game and a first-person shooter. You run around cavernous castle and try and find other people to shoot. And then you get shot yourself quite a bit. And I used to have a gang of guys that I worked with, and they put Quake together after work, and we'd do it for about an hour. And my wife would pick me up afterwards, and she'd see that I was sweating, and I was talking very fast and very excited. And I'd been engaged in this very aggressive game for about an hour at very fast speeds. And they used to laugh at me as I climbed into the van, and my son would be sitting in the back seat, and they'd say, Dave, you're sweating. Did you have a rough day at work? So they knew that I was gaming. My son got an interest in games mostly from mystery games like Myst, where you have to solve the puzzle and there's no real action because you're alone on an island and you're uncovering a archaeological thing. And he and I went through the whole process. I sort of was partnering with him and showed him that there's a puzzle at every level of the game, and it's easy to figure out the puzzle if you try hard. And he learned to do this. And he was quite miffed at his friends who would be playing, what's the one that kid with the flute? And they would get to a point in the game where the puzzle was too hard and they quit. And he was like, exactly. What do you mean we're quitting? We're not quitting. You're supposed to be able to get out of this room. Why not? And why can't? And he would drive them. Well, he became a professional gamer through a bunch of guys who got together regularly to game on the weekends. And he joined this group, and they eventually formed a team for Team Canada, and it represented all across Canada. All these guys who won in their regions appeared in Vancouver and fought to be who was the best Canadian. And then the best top 4 Canadians were invited to the World Championships in Los Angeles. And I'm taking my 14-year-old on a jet to Los Angeles, and I'm going to hang around, looking at stuff and having fun in my media world, while he is 3 days on the weekend gaming. And the Canadian team was phenomenal. It was 12 guys, and they played the game as hard as anybody does. The world champion was at that game, actually, that tournament, and he went on to go on to Survivor and was very successful. I hated Survivor, by the way. It was the end of network television for me. And I had to sit with my son and watch Ken win at Survivor because he knew how to play games really well. And he went all the way to the final 4 until he got used by a nice little lady to win the game. So I come at this from the area of the more you know about something, the less afraid you are of it. And we're quite afraid of the internet, and we're quite afraid of social media. And today's discussions are on those both areas, which are similar, if not gaming. Social media is a bit of a social game too. So that's my kudos for that.
Right.
Yeah.
So okay. So the more you know, as the NBC right comes, the more you know, maybe the less afraid you are. And yet, if we look at some of the research, research, there is a significant, and yes, I fully understand you can get research to say whatever you want to say, but nonetheless, there is scientific research that has pointed to the fact that video games do influence child behavior, and I'm going to bring
Absolutely.
And I'm going to bring. I want to bring Lois in on this
regard,
because I want to bring Lois in on this because because I've seen. I mean, I teach kids, and so I see that what they model or not model. I'm sorry. They do what I model. Yeah. And so if what they're seeing is shoot 'em up, violent, bloody games, why are we surprised that they are behaving after that model? Lois, you've been watching children for a long time. You wrote it 70 plus years, you said to me.
Yes, I did say that. And I think what I want to do is back away from video games and just talk about playing games. Now, when I grew up, I was in backwoods Michigan, up near Canada. It was a very small town, and the boys would go out in the neighborhood or in the countryside or whatever. They'd pick up a stick and they would start shooting at each other and playing war and doing all this stuff. And it was not taught to them. Well, maybe it was. Maybe it was passed down from generation to generation, and this is what every 10-year-old did now or next year or the next year, whatever. But this intense conflict that they were making, they weren't physically hurting each other, but they were play acting. And that has happened as long as I have known people. Now, mostly in the culture I grew up in, it was the boys. The girls were supposed to stay in the house and cook and clean and have tea parties and whatever. And the boys went out and they found their sticks and they did things. Now, when we got uh, wealthy enough that you could actually buy toys, then they had plastic guns that they could go and shoot each other up with. When I came to college in the 70s, there were games that now were on video consoles, and you could go to a game. And I remember Pac-Man. My favorite one was Cubert. It's a little critter
I love
going,
Cubert.
trying to keep it from dropping off the edge. But there were games there where people could continue their love of war. Now, does that mean that video games don't make a difference? No. But it's sort of like saying, oh, I don't know, smoking marijuana leads to crack cocaine. Well, no, drinking milk leads to it. If just because you do something and you do something else doesn't mean that they're causing
Right,
each other.
right. What's the phrase? Causation does
Correlation
not
does not
correlation does not
causation.
equal
Right.
causation. Right. Or maybe it's the other word.
And
Causation doesn't equal whatever. Yeah.
No, it's correlation does not.
Right.
Yeah.
so I can't tell if the people who are doing horrible things, the serial killers, and who played games, uh, if they're this because of that, or if they're this because of that.
But let me
I mean, I think people are just drawn to playing games that are violent if that's what they want to do.
So I think you're
There's
right. And
a
I remember the kids. I mean, I was the geek who didn't go outside and make guns and things like that. And interesting, you mentioned the plastic guns. My girls, so I have 4 girls, and they're all older now, but they never. We didn't even allow water guns in our house. I mean, and ironically, my third moved to Israel, joined the Israeli army, and she now is kind of a pro with
an
weapons,
expert
which is
gun.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just which and
Well
like
trained too.
seeing
Yes.
her holding
Mhm.
a gun blows my mind a little and terrifies me. But you said something at the end there, Lois. Tamara, I'm going to throw this to you, but you said something at the end, Lois, that you mentioned the sort of the crazies out there who are doing these horrible crimes. I'm not sure that that's who I'm concerned about. I think I'm concerned about the boys who use I don't want to sway this, who end up bullying, who treat other children as if they're in some sort of game where they can be controlling, or where it's win or lose, fast or slow, cool or not. Tamara, you used video games in education.
Yeah, I've used them in a couple of different ways, and I have I have so much to say. Just thinking about what Dave said first is what we don't know is what we're more afraid of, and I was thinking about just bridging off of what both Lois and Dave said. When I used to teach elementary school, it was when Harry Potter was coming out, and the kids on the playground would play Harry Potter. And that was horrifying to parents. And I taught in a private school, and they were like, "We can't have this. Like, they're, this is a terrible thing. It's going to lead to them learning about witchcraft and all of these other crazy things." The truth of the matter is, if you actually watched the play, what they played was the friendship. They didn't play the spells. They played like who gets to be the good guy and the bad guy. And I think that in a lot of ways, sometimes especially with games that they play with each other, um, there's more than the game itself. And I just looking at your example of like boys bullying, that wouldn't explain how many females who do not play video games are some of the worst bullies that I've ever had in my classroom. So I think that we can't use one thing to as a causation to the other. I used video games in education in a really interesting way. I had a Saturday class that was a 2-hour writing class. that kids were sent to on the weekends, and how boring to be a middle schooler and having to go to class. So I kind of surveyed my classroom. I knew nothing about video games because I was not a gamer, but my nephew at 2 years old could go onto the Disney site, put in the D in the URL, get to Disney, and play his video games by himself, which was amazing to me because his brother was not pre-programmed to do video games. He took all his toys apart and put them back together again. But what I did is I created a class. I kind of surveyed what they liked, and I created a course that was video games as literature. And I used James G., who is a scholar who writes about video games and literacy. And we started with Zork, which was my favorite to start with because it's all text. And they immediately said, "This is horrible. I can't do this." And then they'd come back the week later and they were like, "I was up all night." So we used video games, looking at them from plot, and I kind of gave them a lot of free reign in terms of where they wanted to go, and it was amazing because we started in September, and by mid-October they were dissecting scholarly articles that you wouldn't see until graduate school together as a team, breaking it down, doing all of the things that we would hope and dream and love for students to be able to do, looking at primary sources, looking at, pulling out context, discussing it and analyzing it in work that they will never see documents like that. I was pulling them off of, journal articles. They'll never see stuff like that until not just regular college. They won't see it till graduate school. And here these young people were 12 years old, 11, 12 years old, having deep conversations that I just backed out of the room and gave them the information and just watched and would pause a question every once in a while. But they were interacting with the material in a way that was way deeper than I could have ever hoped to teach by October of a year. So I think that there value to it. I do see what you're saying, but I think it's a bigger issue that you're talking about, right? You're talking about male representation in media, and
hmm
that is definitely a bigger issue that I think boys do grapple with. I think that there's
hmm
one vision of what it means to be male, and we're starting to say that there are more visions of what it means to be female, and that I think is something that we might look at. But I don't know that I think there's a causation with violence, as and it's not just that, it's media in general, like that. There's a study for everything that says that media
Dave,
is
I'm going to let
terrible.
you come in here, but I have to say I
Sure.
am really surprised. I mean, I see an absolute link, and I'm just, I'm
Really?
surprised. Yeah, I'm surprised.
Okay.
Again, I don't know
You
what I'm
know-
talking about.
Have you given any thought to what the outlets are for young boys? Like, what are they allowed to do?
Right.
And
Sport.
they don't get a chance to get the aggression out. So they sit in front of the console and they do it
Of
there.
course, what are you talking about? Kick a
What
ball,
aggression?
bang your head against the wall, kick a ball, throw a ball, hit a ball, like do anything with it. What do you mean get your aggression
Have
off?
you been to sports? Those are just as violent.
Well, no,
I mean,
you're right. You're right.
like-
I'm a fan of hockey,
right.
and we all play hockey up here in
No,
Canada. And all the
that's
guys want their
fair.
kid to be an NHL star, and the game is tough.
No, you're right.
dangerous
NHL, even the
and
NFL.
fast.
You're absolutely right.
Yes.
But okay.
So
And-
that's where you get it. No, it's somebody. You're the guy who didn't want to do that.
Well,
You're
no,
the
but
guy
I
who
would
wasn't out
argue,
there with a
Dave.
stick
No, but
shooting
I
other
would
kids.
argue that do I think that we learn first of all, hold on. First of all, we need to define, or it may not define, but we have to understand that there is a distinction between aggression and violence. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I think it would be a stretch for anyone to argue that we are not more aggressive because of things that we see on screen, on television, things that we engage with. That doesn't necessarily mean that we end up being more violent because of it.
That's right.
Now, having said that, I do think that sports are a part of, I don't know if they're the chicken or the egg, right? The fact that sports are so violent, I'm not sure if that causes more aggression or
No,
if
they're
they are
aggressive.
more
They're
aggressive.
aggressive. They're not violent.
Well, I'm not
the
sure.
only,
I
the only
mean,
violent sport I know is boxing. That's the only one that I consider violent.
well,
The rest is all just,
boxing
hard action.
and
Rugby and
I mean, look,
cricket is very violent
I don't play
too,
them,
but
but if
nobody
you're
ever punches
banging
each
your
other,
head against someone, that seems pretty violent to
I
me.
think
No,
this speaks a lot to the things we've been talking about. That we always kind of come down to, right? It's really about education, and it's about understanding and teaching young people and adults who don't know how to parse the information that is coming at them in a technological way.
and
Because
what behaviors are appropriate.
and what
Yeah.
behaviors are appropriate. Because like I know kids who definitely were violent kids, but if I also looked at their whole picture, it wasn't only video games that was influencing their life choices, right? And I know kids who w- played video games since the time they were little and are like the least violent people that I know.
of
So
course. And to be
I
clear,
think
there's never one thing though. The question
Yeah.
is this
Yeah.
a contributing factor? Because all we
No
can
more
do,
than any other.
I don't know
maybe
that.
not,
Yeah,
maybe
I would
not.
agree. I would say that we can make a case that watching too much of anything and being on the internet and video games and television and movies are all things that are contributing. But I also think that is that's like the first part of the question, right? Okay, if that's true, then what? Right?
Hmm.
And the truth is, there are equally a number of people who play video games and who are productive members of society who do not beat people up and who aren't bullies. Like I think that's the part that that I bump on. Do I
Okay.
think that
Hmm.
violence can create violence? Sure, but it can also create. We know that um, kids in recent wars have been better equipped to fly airplanes than previous wars where they didn't play video games.
That
So
all that does, sorry, all that does is prove my point. All that does is prove my
No,
point.
it doesn't.
no, it
Oh, it
doesn't.
absolutely does.
It
Because
proves
if
that they can be
children,
used as an
if
educational
yes,
tool.
but what that says is it is an educational tool, which means that it teaches children how to do things, how to behave, how to react, how to be in the world,
How
and
to
it teaches
concentrate.
them for good, so they can
Right.
fly their airplanes better, and it has the potential to teach them for bad as well. Lois,
But
Hmm.
here's the
come to
question.
my defense, Lois.
The bigger thing about that, all of that research was how many people had access to games that had been rated M that were not appropriate for children. So that is
We're
the other
back to last
issue.
week's discussion. Yeah.
If we're going, wow, these games that are inappropriate for children are getting in the hands of children, and then they're causing really bad things for children when we said they were bad for
Right.
children.
Then the problem isn't the game, it's who's
Then
playing
the
the
problem
game. Yeah.
isn't the game. The problem is that the game is enticing and kids are, in the same way that I'm sure none of you ever tried to sneak into a rated R movie when you were younger, right? So this is not a new phenomenon that it's
Yeah.
like, oh wow, kids want to do something they're told they can't do. Of course, if it says M and I'm not of that age, of course I'm going to want to do that.
I'm sorry,
Mhm.
Lois, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So one of the things that happens when people talk about these subjects is an assumption that we have an overarching uniform way that people learn. Boys are going to be like this because that's how boys are taught. Well, it depends on the culture, it depends on the family,
Mhm.
it depends on where you grew up. My dad grew up hunting and fishing, and his gang of friends went out in the woods. Now they weren't beating up on each other, they weren't fighting, they were just that's where they lived. So I think one of the challenges, and I disagree with David in some ways, but in one other way, I think the difference is that when my brother and his friends went out and played war, they were gone for an afternoon and then they came back and they did other things during the week. When my friends in college started getting these games that were quite violent, and I mean, the game itself was violent, not that the person was violent with the game, they were just moving their fingers, but the intention was to kill and bomb and all this other stuff. And they did it much, 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 much more. They did it
Mhm.
for a long time. They did it continuously. Occasionally they did it with friends, but usually they were just standing at one of these machines, going like this and trying to blow stuff up. So, how long are you being affected by whatever it is that you're being affected? And how is that received by your family, your culture, your church, your friends? And all of that makes a difference. So I don't think, David, that we have a situation where every boy in the world or in the US or in Canada is going to be affected by this stuff because not everyone is going to do it.
Like me.
Well, let
Like,
me address the effects. Um, the study I put a link to that impressed me the most is when they studied the state that a child falls into when they're concentrating on a game. And it's similar to the state of meditation. It's an alpha state, it's a
mm,
concentration level and awareness, a self awareness that is really concentrated and focused. And for children to be able to learn to stop everything and just concentrate on one thing, that's amazing. So if the game does that for them and they get a sort of what would you call it? Well, satisfaction in a sense that they've accomplished something they did. They got to the next level. They leveled up. They get to cheer about it with their friends, and then they can show another guy. My son was a gunslinger. He would go to tournaments or other places, and he'd charge $5 and you can play him because people thought, oh, he's a champ. I'm going to challenge him. This is the gunfighter thing. And he'd knock him out. That's
a
great.
thing?
But always,
You could-
yeah,
you-
and always
Really?
he came back and said, you know what, you should do better. And then he would show them. He says, when you're playing this character, one of the things you can do, let me show you how that works. And then he'd show them, and they become a better player because they played him. So it's like chess. You play better players, you learn the moves, and if they're comfortable showing you, they say, what you did wrong here is when you castled, you left the bishop loose, and we would take you apart with it. So in that sense, the way I saw it, because I sat with parents who had all the kids in their living room in front of 4 or 5 screens playing. And they would look at me and go, Dave, are you okay with this? I says, yeah, well, let's watch for a minute. Look at these guys talking about it. They're not just sitting there doing this and ignoring everything. They're talking about what they're doing and they're sharing
mhm.
information and they're all laughing about something. And they're all laughing at George over here who made a silly joke in the middle of the game. So it's the same socialization and the same teamwork and the same opportunity for cooperation that we all like to teach at school. We want them all to play well with others and to coordinate, but also to share what you're learning and give tips to the other kids. And when they grow up and become adults, my son's an engineer. He's a mechanical engineer. He's in a team of people that are doing something that nobody's tried before. They're from all over the world. They speak all different languages, and he's totally comfortable with that. And this is real time. This ain't a game. This is them inventing the future. And I saw him doing that in games. They would teach each other how this works and learn to control their emotions so that they could concentrate. And my son knew that if he concentrated too much, he forgot to eat. And he learned that all on his own, that he had to stop gaming long enough to eat a sandwich, have some orange juice, and get back to it. Otherwise, he was useless. He couldn't win the games. So these
Part
are things that I learned from watching them do this.
So just
Part of this
hold on
is
one
like
second, Tamara, just before
yeah.
we go on. Sorry, I just want to bring in that Alex Knight is watching, and he says that, boy, that text is really small. Can I make that text bigger? Hold on, I can't even see what it says. How do I make it bigger? He says, no, come back. Wait, come back. I lost it. He says, parents were screaming that video games were destroying children's brains in the 80s. That's a little bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned out just fine. I don't know, Alex. That's debatable. Well, I've been playing violent first-person shooters all my life. And he also adds, and I love this because I'm a big fan of Jeff Jarvis. In the words of Jeff Jarvis, moral panic.
Yes.
And maybe
yes.
I'm just being panicked.
Sorry.
Ugh,
Yeah.
Tamara, go ahead.
But then what's the other
Not for
question
the
about
first
this?
time either. You
that's
panic
true.
about a lot of different things. Yeah.
Go ahead, Tamara.
Why are games so exciting, right? It is exactly what Dave's saying. People get to feel accomplished. And these are kids who are tested every single day and told how much they are lacking. That is how the education system in the United States works. It says you are not performing in this way and you are somehow broken. And here they get to have autonomy and control and be knowledgeable about something. And I found when I used video games as the in where people could feel knowledgeable, suddenly these other skills that I was praying for them to learn, they were all better than I could have ever taught them. The best thing I could do was shut up and just let them go. So I do think that it is exactly as Alexander says, is moral panic. I I I get that, and I talk to parents all the time, and they're like, "I'm worried about my kids. I'm worried about them not, not seeing the light of day, and that this is the only thing that's important to them." And part of me is like, I agree with that. I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, you do have to look at, you know, setting parameters and setting, the ideas of what you expect in your family. And that's different for everybody. But also, kids love to do things parents hate. And in a way, I think that pushes people to have a divide within their own families. And I would just say that there's a lot of things that are great about gaming, and it's not just boys. I really want to point that out because I know a lot of great gamer girls. And I think that at the core, gaming is strategic thinking. It is quick thinking. It is working when you're working with a game with a friend. It is actually teamwork. It is all of the things that we really want kids to learn and understand. And I think too much of anything is probably a bad thing. But I don't. But I think that when we start making blanket statements like violence is caused by this, when we have plenty of examples of kids who gamed and turned out fine, they're not violent individuals at all. Now, if someone is predisposed to violence, why might they be predisposed to violence? Are they in a violent, do they have other samples in their life of violence that is contributing to why they're more violent? That's that's different. And also, I think that when we look at bullies, it is the part of bullying that we have a picture of, which is, you know, super mean and like a lot of times bullying doesn't look the way that you think it looks. Like I had a group of students, good kids. These were generally good kids, and they kind of got into. They created a Facebook profile of one of their friends, a fake Facebook profile, and then were bullying through there. But it wasn't even mean bullying. It was a kind of a group thing. And when we sat down with them, one of the things that we said, this is something kids don't understand about the internet, about gaming, about any of these things, is that when we were younger and got into trouble, that's all. No one knows where the bodies are buried. It was not on someone's cell phone. It wasn't something that people had instant access to. So I do think growing up right now is much more difficult. These are kids who've grown up in the spotlight, grown up with media in a way that none of us had. But I think that, again, using one thing to say why someone is doing something, bullying comes out of a place. It does not mean it's okay. It's never okay. But where is that coming from? What need is not being met by that person that is
Mhm.
causing that? And I don't think it can be like, oh, they've watched too much television or they have video games.
Right. And
They may be unattended.
right.
Maybe that's part of it.
Alex says that, a nuanced problem requires nuanced discussion. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And
Mhm.
so the answer is not the suggestion is not that video games are the sole cause or even the primary cause of violence, but I think that
I want the
and
world before violence, the one that
Right.
was before violence. When was that?
say again.
Uh, Before Adam and Eve.
Yeah, I
No,
think that was
absolutely.
the
The
time when
question
there
is
was
no,
no
but
violence.
the debate is not. And we're going to transition now to talk a little more broadly
Sure.
about social media,
Yeah.
but the suggestion is not that there was no violence before video games or that video games are the sole promoter of violence.
Mhm.
Our world is filled with things that are coming at us, and the only thing that we have control
Hmm.
over is how are we going to react to all of these inputs that are coming at us.
Yeah.
And a few of us get to decide how much of each input we allow out into the world. So the question for me is, how much of this input, this of video games, of specifically violent video games, do we want to put out in the world, knowing that it is hitting lots of children, knowing that parents aren't necessarily taking the precautions that they need to, knowing that children are spending too much time, and knowing, and here's how I'm going to do this transition, watch this happen, and knowing that these games are meant to be addictive, like everything on the internet, like all
They're
of
engineered
social
that way,
media.
yes.
The whole point of social media is to get you to keep on scrolling because there's another
Engagement.
ad coming your way. So,
Yeah.
by way of transitioning us a little, but we certainly don't have to be done with this, let's broaden the conversation and let's think about our mental health and the mental health of all the people who we know and love who are perhaps like we are. I don't want to speak for any of you, but I am addicted to social media and to the internet. What has this done to us? You just said, Tamara, that you feel like it's been, it's much more difficult for children growing up today. Should we do something about that? I mean, it seems to me that that's a throwaway line unless we're willing to take responsibility for the fact that some of these very things, social media, being online all day, staring at screens, video games, are contributing to why it's so much more complicated for our children.
I think that I agree that there's I think
Lois,
there's a
I'm
lot
coming
of
to you
work.
next, I promise.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I can even say that with myself too, because I remember being on Facebook and I would be posting and I would try to post things positively. And I remember I'd gone to somewhere where I hadn't seen someone for a long time and they're like, oh my gosh, I have been following you and you're like so amazing. Like things are going so well. And I was like, I'm unemployed. I'm not having a good time in my family life. I'm just posting positively. And it was like there is a disconnect between the person that we present and carefully cultivated streams that we put out into the world. And I think that that it can be really, really debilitating going through and watching how perfect everyone else's lives feel like they are. And I think that that's why we do have to have we have to have more conversations about what it is that we're doing and setting parameters. There was a great book, and I can't remember the author, but the title is Hamlet's Blackberry, where the author basically took their cell phones and everybody like turned them in, and over the weekend they unplugged, and just looking at what life was like when you unplug. I cannot unplug. I have to have an emotional support technology with me in like everywhere that I go. So there's a reality of that.
Yeah.
I'm like, if I just bring one piece of technology with me, it is like a good day.
Right.
Like people
Lois,
are
are you able to unplug, Lois?
Oh, that's an unfair question.
Oh, what? Wait a second.
on this panel. No.
Unplug what? So when we get on this show, I have to turn my phone to airplane mode so that it won't disrupt the show. And so many times when I've done that in the past, when I'm recording something, I'll forget to turn it back on.
Oh, wow.
And you can't set yourself an alarm because, of course, you're out. This is my new tool. It's an envelope that says I can't take it out of here unless I turn it. Okay, so
wait.
I can
Hold on. Is that
unplug.
an envelope? You put your phone in an envelope?
Sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's fantastic.
We're going to have to send you a
That's my
Faraday
new favorite
envelope.
thing, Lois. I love that to
We'll
death.
We'll get her a Faraday envelope so she can, keep the rays out.
You know what? My brain is just melted enough that I'd leave it on my desk. Someone would put a stamp on it and they'd mail it to Timbuktu or something.
It's not sealed. And it came from somebody else.
Oh, there you go.
It's
That's a bill.
recycling.
Yeah.
So, but what I wanted to say was cast your minds back and back 60 years ago. Okay? So 60 years ago, 1960s, television existed, and it had been out for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. And people were going, It's going to brainwash people. Everybody's going to be thinking the same thing because they're all watching the same stuff. Didn't happen. But the fear of some new technology taking over your life has been with us for quite a while. Now, I want to shift this a little bit and talk about the parents for a moment.
Wait, Lois, sorry.
What?
Before you do that, I have to take issue with what you just shared, because of course I agree with you that there has always been that we've always been worried about influence and bubbles and all of that, but this is a completely different scale than when you and I were growing up. And there was
It is.
and there were 3
It is.
channels on television. I mean, this is,
But we were,
and in
we couldn't
fact,
have had this conversation back then if we were our parents.
yes, I just think it would. I think it would perhaps be a more urgent conversation than it is. It feels like a more urgent conversation for me today than it was back then.
I agree. Things are moving fast.
Yeah.
I'll agree with that. Yeah. But let's talk about the parents who are wanting to have their children grow up with these great values that they have. So I know lots of people who didn't have a television because their parents didn't want them to be exposed to all this stuff. And whether you're when you're in a cult or in a religion or just in a family group that has certain values, you want your kids to share those values. And I think the problems that we've had in the last 50 or 60 years have been that we are now able to talk to people from all over the world and who might be very different than our parents. And we as a kid get to choose who we listen to more than we used to. Used to be, you didn't hear anybody but your parents and the teachers in school, and that was about it. You had brothers and sisters for playmates. It's not true anymore, and it hasn't been true for a long time. So one of the good things about having all these interconnections is that if I am a particular persuasion, I can find other people in the world who share that with me, and I can feel good and comfortable about myself. Whereas it used to be, if my grandmother had a particular persuasion that wasn't like everybody else in town, she was out of luck. So anyway, it's a little bit off topic, but the social media issue is, yes, you can be persuaded by things happening in the world, and you can also find people to be persuaded with.
And that last piece that you said, finding people, that's one of the pieces of this that I think is concerning, is these bubbles that we have self-created of only hearing the voices of those that we want to listen to. We have been able to silo ourselves into islands that where we literally just cannot even hear other voices, and that lack of capacity to hear other people online has now translated into real world. We can't even talk to other people. People make jokes about things, how uncomfortable Thanksgiving is going to be. That shouldn't be a joke. We should be able to sit at Thanksgiving and listen to each other and talk. I just want to add one other thing in here, and that is to Tamara. You said before, and you made a note about this in our show notes also, about how people put their best life out on social media. I've heard that a lot, and I think that we've actually, I don't know if jumped the shark is the right phrase here, but I think we've turned a corner.
I agree with that.
Nowadays, people aren't putting their best lives out. They're putting their worst lives out. Nowadays, people are using, all you have to do is look at X or look at YouTube comments even. And look at
TikTok.
The vitriol, the ugliness, the pain even if it's not meant to be mean, just the pain that people are putting out on social media, it's not even it's not just young girls fawning over the beautiful models that they're seeing and how uncomfortable that should make us, that they have to feel that they have to live up to these unreasonable standards. It's young girls seeing other young girls struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts, and that then having a negative impact on them also. There's so
I do
much.
think that, like, to me, I was thinking about that of like, look at where kids, when we're talking about like today's young people, and I'm going to go all the way into like 20, early 20s and down. This is a whole generation that was raised in front of the camera. I mean, so much so that what used to be a private thing, I call these the in utero babies, because my Facebook feed for months was like, here is my in utero picture of my child. That used to be a picture that you shared with just your close family members. And now, so these are kids who are being plastered onto social media before they were even born. And this is how they grew up. And I remember it was really almost 10 years ago now. I was in a high school class, and one of the teachers was like, look at them. They're all like on their phones and looking at themselves and everything. And I was like, because that's where they grew up. Like they would take pictures of science class because that is where their world was. And I do think there is a shift because that also coincides with a shift in how education was, where it shifted to be in particularly in the United States, it shifted to be a testing model where we absolutely measured you and told you you were insufficient. So you had two things happening at the same time: this rise of social media where everyone was presenting perfection, and you had real life situation where your only job as a student was being told how terrible you are and how you are not measuring to where you were supposed to be at that moment. And I really do think that that has shifted us into this moment where we have now, where TikTok has become successful based on people putting up a camera wherever they are and just telling their story. And that story may be like a terrible thing that happened to them at Target, or it could be, feeling like I'm a bad mom and I'm not doing this right. And they're finding solidarity in these spaces that used to be based on perfection. So to me, I really am interested in why is that shift happening, and what do we do to course correct? Because people went from a place of like, I can't beat this perfection, to I'm just going to be my authentic self. And they're finding validation in that solidarity. And so you're right. There's something about that that's equally addictive. If I tell you a terrible tale and go to my comments and I have a bunch of people who are like, wow, hang in there, Tamara, I'm totally with you. Then that's really validating.
Yeah, you're right.
So that's the concern there is we are no longer have we no longer have institutions where people feel validated in real life. And so I think that
So these have
you're correct.
So social media has replaced those institutions?
So you're correct, but I also think that we have to really be like thinking about what is friendship and how do you be present for people? How do we create environments where people can feel comfortable in spaces and get validation or feel heard? If the only place you can feel heard is in a social media space, whether that's even innocently posting on Facebook, you get likes and that's validating. So
Right.
what is in our real lives is creating a lack of validation that this is the replacement.
Dave,
So
do you remember? Hold on, I'm sorry, Lois. Dave, do you remember getting birthday cards? What?
I do.
Like, no, you don't. You're too
I
young.
do.
Dave, like we used to actually get, Lois and Dave and I, as the old folks here, we used to get birthday cards, and I remember the year.
I love that you think I'm so young.
I remember the year when the first year when I got more Facebook posts than birthday cards. That shift happened, and now I think I get one from my mother every year. No one says,
Right.
but lots of people say something on Facebook. That really has replaced. And I mean, you could also, I mean, there's an argument to be made about. Well, it has replaced social media has replaced a lot of these institutions, even institutions like sending cards.
Mhm.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Lois. I'm
Well,
sorry.
I'll
Gotta jump
just start
in.
with
All right, wait a second. I
yeah.
gotta get Dave, and then I'm coming right to you, Lois.
It's
I
been
promise.
20 minutes since I spoke, so I
Dave
get to
keeps
talk
track.
a little bit here.
Dave keeps track.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Dave.
Well, I'm in TV. I keep track of every minute. But anyway, a couple of things. I'll start with it's my sister's birthday today. And I texted her and said, happy birthday.
Well, wait a second. Do we have to sing
And
now?
I had, no, you don't have to sing. You don't even know who she is or where she is. Oh, he's been hoping to use that for weeks. I gave you it. I just gave it to you. Okay.
Thanks.
I wanted to say something else about, and Lois triggered this for me. I'm not triggered, but she brought this back. And the memory is a project that was operating at my university. And I was asked to document it on video as to how they were doing this. And the project was called the Resiliency Project, and it was to try and find out why it is children from really broken families actually succeed, and not given the skills and not having the guidance, and how did they get out from under that situation? And that project brought to the fore two things. One is that a child who really is interested in the world, in a world of people who aren't, finds a way through. And they just do it because that's the human curiosity instinct. But the second thing was that most of the cases they examined and researched, and this is 5 guys who spent 3 or 4 years on this, they found that a child who is in a difficult situation can come across someone who's sympathetic. It can be a neighbor, it can be an uncle, it can be, I don't know, a teacher. It can be a person that's just around the neighborhood or a relative who listens to what they have to say when nobody else will. And as soon as they have that relationship going, it helps them get through everything. They can look away from their current situation, which is inexplicable. I don't know how I got here. I was just born into this. I have no control of the situation. But there's this guy I meet every week, and we sit down on a park bench and have a sandwich, and he listens to me, and I get it all out. And he gives me guidance. He tells me how it is. So in the sense that we're able, in what Tamara was saying about finding my tribe and being able to have support, it's there. It's out there. And all I have to do is be authentic to someone else. And if they respond well to you, you have a way out of that situation. And that gets people out of depression. It gets them out of, I mean, there was a case of a kid who had himself arrested just to get out from his family. And he actually engineered the whole thing so that the cop would arrest him. He'd get about 2 years of juvie, and now he's out. His family doesn't want anything to do with him, and he's more than happy to get rid of them. Now, the third thing.
So wait, I just want to clarify, Dave. So is the argument that social media, because
is an opportunity,
it provides space for people to connect who may not otherwise connect, and to receive support they may not otherwise receive?
Yeah.
Okay, that's half
and
of
escape their circumstances.
That's right. That's some of what it does.
Right. And look at the disabled people who are turning to the social media.
Absolutely.
Because they are anonymous on social media. You don't know they're neuro different. And then they respond to you and you respond to them. You have no idea. The third thing I wanted to bring up was in my early years in television, I produced television for various communities of interest. These are people who were all interested in a thing. And we would make a show every week about that thing. And I actually did a show with disabled people, but I also did a show with lifers. Anybody who's never met a lifer, it's quite an experience. These guys came out of the local maximum security jail, came to my studio and made a television show about what they were interested in. And it was the saddest thing you ever saw. But we teach them how to do it themselves. And in learning to be a cameraman or operate the audio board and all this stuff, I get to meet and talk to these guys as real people. I couldn't believe it was a real education for me. I couldn't believe these guys had such a narrow idea of what the world works like. And I realized it's their upbringing. They came from a situation where the rules were so narrow that when they broke one, it was a huge consequence. And they didn't understand what was going on. Now, we do know now from research 3/4 of the guys in there have FASD, and they were raised with alcoholic parents, and as in utero, they were affected and their brain development was impaired. But I met this one guy who said, "Oh, this is a great con you're doing here with us in this TV show." And I went, "What are you talking about?" "Oh, it's like the prime minister. He's got a con too." I'm going, "What's a con? What are you talking about?" And he was talking about how he sees the world as to who's exploiting who. That's his whole model. And I think if a guy was like that on the internet, he'd run into people who are going to take advantage of him, but he's all going to meet people who can explain to him that that's not how it all works. And that's kind of what we're doing here, is we're having a nice deep discussion about something that a lot of people would love to have a conversation about, but we get together, the four of us today, to talk about this, and it's going to lead to other people understanding something.
Yeah. Lois, go ahead. Oh, Lord.
No, this is it's a tough discussion. And one of the things I have trouble with is the assumption that everybody's on social media. Everybody's
Mm.
everybody's on Facebook, everybody's on X or whatever the thing of the moment is. And not allowing for the fact that there's so many different people in the world doing so many different things. So I understand that if you're a teacher and you've got 30 kids every year and you have to figure out how to teach them, you got to do the percentages. You got to say, well, I can reach 20 of them if I do this. And if I do that, I'll only reach 15. I guess I'll do this. But in actuality, if we're talking about human beings, then they're not all the same. They're not,
Right.
Dave was talking about the lifers who were born that way. Okay. I never knew that was possible, but okay. But so let's think about ways we can improve our interaction with social media or the children's interaction or something like that without assuming that everything is the same. And we go back to violence and gaming. Gaming is not violence. I mean, when you say gaming, there's a whole wide world of stuff that people can do when they're playing games. And it isn't just the violent blow them up kind of things.
Okay.
I'm
I'm going to
sorry.
be the contrarian here again. That's just my job, I guess.
No, I'm the contrarian.
no-
Come on, you can't be at the
Well,
same time as me.
Then I'm the pain in the. Wait.
Oh, there we go.
I need
All
a.
right. You need a
Oh wait.
beeper.
Wait. I have one somewhere. There. I'm the pain
There
in
you
the. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
To say that not everyone is on social media, of course that's true. But the fact that a third of the planet, maybe let's be generous, a quarter of the planet is,
Mhm.
that's number one. Second of all, is that you don't have to be on social media to be impacted by social media. The amount of misinformation that forget misinformation, the amount of information and how quickly it's able to spread because of social media. I may be able to avoid social media, but as soon as I come in contact with another human being who doesn't avoid it like me, guess what? I've been influenced by social media. So I think we're underplaying a little bit. We're not giving enough credit to the power and the force of social media. You know, the big story this week is, one of the big stories is how so many people are leaving X and flocking to Blue Sky. Well, I mean, it's not that huge of a. X has 550 million monthly active users. Blue Sky has 2 million. So, I mean, it's not, or maybe more than that, but at this point, but it's not a huge flocking. But the reason that people are talking about that is because of what is at the very least perceived to be negative ugliness, just dreck on X that is impacting their lives, and they want to find something that is whatever, the opposite
It's
of
a
that.
new traffic pattern. It's like,
Maybe, but
there's
it's a new
construction
traffic
on
pattern
Fifth Street,
because
and so now I'm going to go around 4th Street.
fine,
That's all that is.
but that's fine. But but what that says is that they're trying to avoid traffic, or they're trying to avoid the speed bump, or they're trying to avoid the accident, right?
Yeah.
The fact is that social media is kind of a
What do you want it to
traffic
be?
jam. Well, so that was going to be my question, right?
Right.
And we're not going to get to the answer today, and that's fine. But is this a ship that is just too big to turn? Do we all just need to hold on for dear life, or are there things that we can actively do, to make social media more of a help to our mental health and less of a hindrance to it?
I think one of the things that's super important is that both things are true. This is not a binary and either or. Both things are true. It is a huge ship that it seems unsurmountable. It does cause depression in some people in how they interact with people. It does cause connection and, accessibility, unlike anything else we've seen. All of these things are true. And whenever you have something that has this much nuance and this much, variability, then I think it really does come down to educating. And also, like, I've had to take times where I'm like, okay, I need to not be on this because I'm mentally just cannot be on Facebook. I just need to not be on it for a while, whatever that is. But I think we have to continue these conversations because I think both things are true. And to say, well, is it gone? Is everything gone? There's a lot of things that are causing the unrest, and social media is certainly a part of that, because the fact that we are not having engaging conversations that are both sides or multifaceted, where we've gotten to a point where it's like, if you are not parroting back what I want to hear, then I don't want to hear from you. That is a much bigger issue, right? And it's, social media may have been the thing that is pushing this kind of cancel culture that we live in right now, but I don't think it's just not that simple. It's not simple enough to say I'm going to get off of social media completely, and it's not simple enough to say that it's all good. I think that really both things are true, and they're true on like the best and worst sides. Like there's a lot of space in the middle. I'm sure there's lots of people who can navigate social media fine. They're not on it too much. They're not on it too little. That's not what drives their life. That's just what it is. And for other people, it is deeply, deeply disturbing for them, or deeply, deeply satisfying for them.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to talk about.
Let me give a closing word to Lois and then a closing word to Dave. Go ahead, Lois.
So all of what Tamara said is very true. And all of what we've been talking about this whole program is very interesting and true. And yet, keep in mind that social media is not a giant ship. Or if it is, there's like 12 giant ships out there, and I'm on this ship. And if I don't like the way it's going, or if they get a new captain, I don't like that captain, I can just pick up and move someplace else. And so we have more control in our lives than people give us credit for. And we and you can choose what you want to see, what you want to hear. You can turn off comments if you don't want to hear people say bad things, or you can make your own comments and boilerplate them into everybody who's doing nasty stuff. Anyway, I'm a great believer of petting kittens.
Right. Sorry, Dave, just before I throw it to you for a closing thought, I just want to say that thank you, Lois. That I agree with everything you said. One of the pieces we didn't get to discuss tonight, which you just raised for me, is this idea of FOMO, of the fear of missing out. Because you're right, we can turn it off. We can turn off comments, but then what often happens, and I'll speak for myself, is I sit there on the couch thinking about all what I'm missing. And that's another piece of this kind of addictive quality that this has, which is not, I'm not saying that's bad. It's a thing that we have to wrestle with. Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, you guys went through the route of, are you on social media too much? And I'm very disciplined. I use my computer mostly for work, and I get a lot of work done on a computer, and I get a lot of work done on my iPad as well. And so for me, social media is like reading a magazine. It's something I can do on a Sunday. It's something I can handle for 1 or 2 days a week, and the rest of the time I'm kind of busy. And keeping busy or having obligations outside of my home allows me to interact with real people all the time. And so I guess I'm kind of lucky that way, but it's also, I made it my business. I made it my career to interact with other people and help them do what they do. And video has been my outlet. And I learned a lot through video just by getting opportunities to meet amazing people and see amazing things and have adventures with other people through making a program about something. But in the sense that people are talking about social media as having this enormous influence, I go back to my remarks, which I'll probably repeat every episode here, is that we empower these things by giving them our attention, by letting it run our lives. And it's not a failing of social media. Social media is successfully attracting my attention, engaging me, and making me pay attention to ads and things. And that's fine, but that's the mechanism we understand. And I like Tamara's idea that there is a change going on. Young people who were brought into this and it was brand new, there's a whole new generation where it's not brand new. And they're going to have a whole different attitude toward whether or not this is going to run my life. Now, I do know a couple of my friends killed themselves before there was ever social media because they were depressed about things and they didn't have any outlet for it. And one of them was a great filmmaker, and it's a shame she's gone. But my son also had friends who had killed themselves and were part of a problem of getting known or having people listen to what they have to say. And so I sense that, we have every reaction in the world to any new thing that we don't understand. But the only way to dive in and learn about it is to engage with it, find out what it's doing to yourself, see how it's changing the way you think, and then assess, self-reflect. I often talk about the iPad as a mirror. It's a hand mirror. It's about the right size for a hand mirror, and it reflects me back to myself. And as long as I have that mechanism in my head, I can control how often I want to stare at myself. So
that's I love that. Thinking about how much time I spend looking at social media is really a mirror. I'm looking at. I think, as Tamara, as you were talking about before, when I look in social media, I think that I'm looking at other people's stories and other people's lives. But the truth is, that's all just a reflection of me. What I see in those other people's stories and those other people's posts, that's all me. Mm-hmm. That's, wow.
You don't read every article in a magazine. You read the ones you're interested in.
Right.
And you go to you scroll past all the nonsense to see if there's something interesting. And many people, I watch them on the bus, I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but those packed trains in Japan where they push you on and there's so many people? You know what they're doing the whole trip?
What's that?
This.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
They're scrolling because there's nothing else to do. For that 40 minutes that they're on the train, that you can't get anything done. So you may as well just look at TikTok or play a game. Or I saw a little old lady playing a game.
Right.
Because that's what she could do while waiting on the train.
Rajan is watching, and I appreciate your honesty, Rajan. He stares at himself too much. I think we all do that.
Maybe we've broken through here.
I think so. Go ahead.
Don't forget the communication aspect. We haven't even talked about that. It replaces letters. I can post a thing saying I'm selling this object, or does anybody have any extra apples or whatever. That communication is still.
I'll never forget the time that I had to explain to my son that the letter he put in the mailbox was actually going to get to France. He couldn't figure out how that was going to get there. And he was like 14 or 15 at the time.
It's interesting you said that, Lois, because my kids use social media for communication. That's how they talk to their friends. They don't really use it for sharing, which is interesting. All right, I'm going to call it. It's late. I am so grateful to all of you, Dave and Tamara and Lois. really from the bottom of my heart. I came into this a little late because I had something really annoying I had to deal with, and I feel I'm so happy. You make me
Stimulated
happy.
now.
You make
Yes.
me
That's what I'm
happy, and I'm grateful for
See?
all of you.
And this is what sharing is all about. Is
Right.
getting people
Sharing is
on the same
caring.
wavelength.
If you
Social
want to get
media.
if you want to get in on some of the love, just head on over to the rundown.show. Drop me a note. We'd love to have you on the panel. Love to have you watch us. Thank you, Alex and Ray Franklin and Rajan and everyone else who's been watching us online, and Hershey. It's great to have you all here. We will see you next week, hopefully on time next week, on another episode of The Rundown. Night, everyone.